So when you hear the term project crashing, what's the first thing that pops into your head? I'm guessing it's chaos, right? Some desperate, last-minute move to pull a project back from the brink. But what if I told you it can actually be a really precise, strategic tool? In this explainer, we're going to totally dismantle that idea of panic and rebuild it into a clear, calculated plan.
Okay, picture this. It's the scenario that gives every project manager nightmares. Your deadline is set in stone, but the schedule, well, it's slipping. The clock is ticking, the pressure is on, and that original plan is starting to look like a fantasy. This is exactly where project crashing comes into play. It's the art of hitting the accelerator on a project. And believe me, it's way more sophisticated than just yelling, "Work faster."
So how do projects even get into this spot, staring down a deadline they can't meet? Let's kick things off by looking at the usual suspects, the common reasons a project suddenly needs a massive burst of speed.
A lot of the time, it's a mix of being a little too optimistic at the start and then, life happens. Maybe that first schedule was just super ambitious. Or the market suddenly does a 180, and now you have to launch way sooner just to keep up. But let's be honest, most of the time it's that classic slow drift. The project just falls behind day by day, and that immovable deadline just keeps getting closer. Crashing is how you fight back against these real-world pressures.
All right, so we get the why. Now, let's talk about the how. Crashing a project isn't just one magic button. You have to think of it more like opening up a toolkit. You've got a bunch of different tools inside, and the real secret is knowing which one to grab and when.
The first, and honestly often the best place to start, is just working smarter. This isn't about working harder, it's about finding efficiencies with the team you've already got. Maybe you can cut some red tape, or get rid of some other hidden roadblocks that are just slowing everybody down for no good reason.
Another tool you can pull out is changing how the work actually gets done. This could be anything from bringing in some new tech to using a cool technique called fast tracking. That's where you strategically overlap tasks that you originally planned to do one after the other. It's all about rethinking the entire flow of the work.
Now, we've got to talk about these, but with a giant warning sign attached. You could just cut features from the project or maybe use cheaper materials, but our source material is really clear on this. You're playing with fire here. It might feel like a quick fix, but it almost always creates way bigger, way more expensive problems later on.
And that brings us to the number one gut reaction everybody has. If we're behind schedule, just throw more people at the problem, right? I mean, on the surface, it makes perfect sense. More people should mean more work gets done faster. Well, this is where things get really, really interesting.
Yeah, you heard that right. This leads us to a famous idea called Brooks' Law, and it's a total curveball, because it says that adding more people to a late project can actually make it even later. The very thing you thought was the solution can actually become a huge part of the problem.
How is that even possible? Well, for starters, new people aren't productive from day one. There's a ramp-up time. Second, who has to train them? Your best, most experienced people. So while they're training, their own work grinds to a halt. And finally, you've got communication overhead. With more people, the number of communication lines just explodes. It creates a ton of drag on everything.
So if just throwing more people at it is a bad idea, what's the smart move? Well, it's time to stop thinking about brute force and start using some brain power. The real answer is in a calculated approach that perfectly balances two things, time and cost.
The key idea here is something called the cost slope. And it's a simple concept, but it's incredibly powerful. It tells you the exact dollar amount it'll cost to shorten one specific task by one chunk of time, say a day or a week. It takes a fuzzy problem and turns it into a hard number you can actually work with. And here's how you figure it out. You take the cost of doing the task in a huge rush. That's the crash cost, and you subtract the normal cost. Then you divide that number by the amount of time you're actually saving, which is just the normal time minus the crash time. And boom, the number you get is your cost per week saved. So, for example, let's say a task normally takes 5 weeks and costs $12,000. But you could crash it down to 3 weeks for $32,000. You run the numbers, and the cost slope comes out to 10,000 ringgit per week. Now you have a concrete fact. Shaving 1 week off this task will cost you an extra 10 grand.
Okay, having that number is great, but it immediately brings up the next big question. Is spending that extra 10,000 actually a good idea? And the answer to that depends entirely on where you decide to spend it.
And this is where we graduate from just doing math to using real strategy. Because it's not about crashing just any old task. It's about being surgical. You've got to crash the right tasks in the right order to get the biggest bang for your buck.
So here's the playbook, and step 1 is absolutely everything. You have to find your project's critical path. This is the project's backbone. It's the longest chain of tasks that decides the absolute fastest your project can be finished. Once you know what that is, you only calculate crash costs for tasks on that path. Why? Because speeding up something that's not on the critical path is totally pointless. It won't make the project finish a single day earlier. Then, you find the cheapest task on that path to crash, and this is key, you reevaluate everything after you do it.
Let's see this in action. In this example, you can see path AB is the longest at 24 weeks. So that's our critical path. The other paths have some wiggle room. If we want to shorten this project, our only option is to crash something on path AB.
Okay, now, say we crash a task on that path and save 1 week. Our project is now 23 weeks long. But look what just happened. Path EF, which was already 23 weeks long, is now also a critical path. This is such a great example of a key rule. After you crash, you might suddenly find yourself with 2 bottlenecks to worry about instead of just 1.
So you keep doing this cycle, find the critical path, crash the cheapest task, but eventually you're going to hit a wall. You get to a point like this, where the next cheapest crash costs you 17,000 ringgit, but the benefit, maybe avoiding a penalty, is only worth 12,000. And that's your signal. That's when you stop. It just doesn't make financial sense to go any faster.
And that really brings it all home. As we've seen, crashing isn't some big red panic button you just slam once. It's a dynamic, ongoing series of smart, calculated decisions.
So let's just boil it down to the golden rules of smart crashing. First, your focus has to be locked on to that critical path. Nothing else matters. Always start with the cheapest option. You have to have the discipline to stop when the numbers don't make sense anymore. And maybe most importantly, you have to reevaluate the whole board after every single move, because the entire landscape of your project can change in an instant.
You see, when it's done right, project crashing stops being a frantic, reactive mess, and it becomes a powerful and precise strategic tool. So the only question left for you is, which one are you going to use, the rescue rope or the scalpel?